Sexual harassment continuously popping up in the news, it's really time that we take a stand against sexual harassment and look at the different spaces that we can use to improve human wellness and equality. I'm your show host, Lauren Gombas. Episode number 4. You are listening to From Blueprint to Solved, the podcast about improving sustainability and, of course, always improving human wellness. In this episode, we're going to do a recap on last week's episode with Jeremy Nickel. We are going to talk about what has been happening in the news recently. And of course, we are going to look at solutions because after all, this is a podcast about solutions. So let's start with the recap. I don't know if you guys have heard about Jeremy Nickel's podcast In the Shoes Of, but it's great because it focuses on what it's like to be another person. I thought Jeremy would be a perfect person to come onto the show because he really cares about different social issues. And when I asked him, I was like, Jeremy, I know that you probably can't answer this because there's a lot of things that really matter to you, but what would you say are some of our bigger social issues right now? And he said bigotry, that was the first one, and then the second one was sexual harassment, whether that's in the workplace or being catcalled on the street. He was like, this is an issue we need to work on. So Jeremy and I put our heads together. We did a little brainstorming session. And I was like, okay, Jeremy, here's the issue. Sexual harassment in the workplace. Do you have any ideas of how we can reimagine space, reuse space? And he's like, Lauren, I love virtual reality. I love how interactive it is. I love how it makes you look at other people's perspectives. And so he was like, we're going to use that. Me being someone who likes social engagement, who likes really going to the community and being like, okay, guys, what do we do now? How do we work together to create something? And I think that's kind of a podcaster thing. I think whenever you have a podcast, you really want to engage with other people. But I was like, why don't we take virtual reality and create a simulation? We go to New York, right? We have a little table and booth, and we put together some different pamphlets, different resources, and we have a virtual reality headset that allows people to look at, to help them figure out what they should do when they see someone being sexually harassed, or if they're being sexually harassed, how they should respond. Because the great thing about virtual reality is you get to experience something almost like it's like so real for you, but it's also something that you don't have to it helps you prepare for the actual experience, but you don't actually have to go through the actual experience first. And I don't know how other people are, but I just anytime something really scary happens or anything that's I did not expect for this to happen. I was just walking down the street. I freeze up. I'm amygdala, you're supposed to be in charge of fight or flight, and neither of those are working right now. I'm just frozen. What? So virtual reality is a great source for figuring out how to combat sexual harassment before it actually happens, and I think that would be great. All right, so now we talked about that. I really want to get into what's been really heavy on everyone's minds. And I know sexual harassment has it's been in the news constantly. It's just been popping up over and over and over again. So I want to gloss over it, not because I don't think that sexual harassment is something that we really need to talk about, but I want to focus more on talking about the solutions and the things that we can do to combat sexual harassment. I'm so proud of the women who've come forward. I'm so proud of the men who've been advocates. But in this episode, we're really going to focus on solutions. So let's just talk really briefly about what's happened. So Harvey Weinstein, of course, he's popped up a couple times. Ashley Judd came forward about being sexually harassed, and She created a really awesome resource with Teen Vogue, so I'm going to get into that a little bit later. Also, recently, I'm kind of surprised. I'm shocked. I keep seeing, the list of people, the list of men. And I know that anyone could be a predator, realistically, but there's a long list of men currently. And Louis C.K. had an incident. There was an article that came out about him Thursday, so today's Friday. And basically he had sexual misconduct. So it's just sad to always see these things popping up. But I do think whether it's Weinstein or Louis C.K. or Ben Affleck, no matter who it is being accused, it doesn't matter as much about who's being accused. It matters about what we can do to prevent it. It does seem like there are a lot of successful men, a lot of successful people, but I'm sure that anyone from any background can really hurt society. But also there's anyone from any background can also help society. So hopefully we can work through some positive different things. Despite the fact that it is pretty disturbing that this keeps popping up in the news, it's good that people are reporting it. And that's the great thing about news as a 2D space. And then, well, once people start talking about it, once it becomes something that becomes like a podcast, words become more like 1D. But just having those news sites and then having television, radio, having these different mediums are super important. And it just makes me think of like just having decades and decades and decades of not having these resources, of not being able to speak up against something that's wrong. And that just makes me sick to think that there's so many women and men that suffered for so long without having a voice. So I'm happy that people are coming forward and saying, this is wrong, sexual harassment is wrong, we need to do something about it. So I just want to take a moment to talk about some of the great resources that are out there. I want to focus today a little bit on just the 2D resources for sexual harassment. So first thing, of course, comes to mind, this video that Ashley Judd made with Teen Vogue. It's great because she talks about her personal experience and what happened, and she talks about a couple key things. So I just want to do a little bit of a breakdown on the video. I do have a link in show notes, so I think you guys should check it out because there's something about watching something and listening that really engages. That's really engaging. So first thing that's really great about the video, she talks about her experience and the things that she was feeling. And the important thing about these videos is it helps connect people together. Usually people who have been sexually harassed feel a bit of shame or disgust. There's a couple different emotions and different feelings. And the great thing about this video is she talks about those feelings and those emotions. And a lot of people either belittle people. They're like, you know what, it wasn't a big deal. You shouldn't feel like that. Or sometimes people are like, oh, well, you were being too flirtatious and you were asking for it. No. So sexual harassment. Basically what happened between Weinstein and Ashley Judd is he tried to give her a massage and just kept trying to touch her. And she was like, don't touch me. I love the video that she teamed up with Teen Vogue because she's like, this is how you stop sexual assault. You're like, this isn't okay. I don't want this. Don't touch me. And then, of course, coming forward about it because a lot of people get away with really awful things, and usually these things end up happening to other women or other victims. Second 2D resource is Better Brave. It's basically a guide for targets of sexual harassment. I'm looking at the US edition right now. And I love that they start with a letter to whoever's reading their site. And it's basically you know what? Sexual harassment at the workplace isn't your fault. The target audience of Better Brave, it definitely, the resources, the links, everything they have in their website works for really any sort of situation where there was sexual assault, but they do really focus on the workplace as well. So if you're experiencing sexual harassment in the workplace or you see someone experiencing sexual harassment in the workplace, Better Brave is a great resource. They're also on Twitter. They're betterbrave.com, so definitely check that out if you haven't. It's a great resource. So I love that they have this open letter basically saying, like, it's not your fault. Like, I understand that, like, you probably feel this way, and this way, but it's not your fault. And this isn't something that anyone deserves to experience. So I love that they start with a letter. It builds community. The second thing I love is that there are different resources. There's a resource for basically defining sexual harassment. A lot of times I think people don't completely grasp what it is. I know for me sometimes I have these different interactions with men and I'm like, well, is this okay? Was this bad? Was this not okay? And it's important to define what sexual harassment is, because when we define it, we have a better idea of how to prevent it. Another link they have are my options. My options is about what you can actually do. So some of the things they list on their website, they're like, make it clear you want the harassment to stop. I think that is super important. Some people don't realize that their behavior is really offensive. And I think that's because we keep silent about things that make us uncomfortable, things that bother us. And we really need to speak up and be like, I don't like this. I know that for me, it can be so hard. I'm such a people pleaser. I want people around me to be happy. But when it comes to something like sexual harassment, I really have to be like, I don't like this. Please stop. And don't apologize. That's something they have on there in bold. Never apologize, but be specific about the behavior. And suggest a behavior that's a lot more appropriate. So once again, that's betterbrave.com. The second thing they have on there, they say don't just run to HR just yet. You have to really write down your story and document everything so you have a better understanding of what's happening. And then when you have that ready, when you have all your materials ready, of course you can go talk to HR about it. If it becomes a huge issue, of course you can consider an employment lawyer. And consider a counselor too. A lot of times we hold so many different things. And I know that going to a counselor in different situations where I felt kind of confused about something or scared about something, that's been super helpful. So those are some different steps I have on under the resources, under my options. It gives you sort of an outline of like, here are the different things that you can do. Here are some specific examples. And I think specific examples are helpful, right? That concludes this week's episode. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I really would appreciate your input. If you could go to our website and go to our show notes for episode 4 and make a comment about what you thought about this week's episode. And if you guys can think of any other sort of 2D spaces that fight sexual harassment, I'd love to hear about those. In this episode, I mentioned a resource that Ashley Judd and Teen Vogue teamed up to create, and that's a video that Ashley Judd made after the Weinstein incident. I have a link to that. I also have a link to betterbrave.com so that you can find that in our show notes for episode number 4. Also, if you haven't checked out Jeremy Nichols' podcast, In the Shoes Of, definitely check that out. It is a great podcast on different perspectives. We have releases every Friday. Next week, I'm really excited to have Anthony Biscaglia. He is the podcast host of Clear Lens Movement. It's basically a podcast about spreading around gratitude and thankfulness and trying to improve really well-being. So I'm excited for that. I'm excited to do some brainstorming with him and see what he thinks we can do to help improve mental health. Excited for that. So tune in next week for that episode. Once again, thank you for listening, and we absolutely would love your feedback. So go to our website,
continuously popping up in the news. It's really time that we
let us know what you
take
think.
a stand against sexual harassment
next
and look
Friday.
at the different spaces that we can use to improve human wellness and equality.